We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Aleph on Mesechet Kesuvos. This is Kesuvos Daf 11b. The Mishnah over here continues. Ve'ein lahen tainas besulam. This is talking about a woman who was married, even if there's a presumption that she's a basula, but the very fact that she was married gives her the status of a beula, and therefore there is no claim of basulam. He can't claim I was expecting her to be a basula and she was not. Rashi over here says Ve'ein lahen tainas besulam ein yachol hafsida osomana. She's entitled to 100, like we said in the previous summit, and he can't make her lose that. Ve'lomar v'cheskas besulan esatich. He can't say, well, I married you thinking you were basula v'harei mechi mekachtos, and therefore my purchase is a mistaken purchase, so to speak. And the Mishnah continues, hagiores v'hashvuya v'hashifcha. You have a case of a convert, a captive, or a maidservant, sheniftu v'shenesgairu v'shenestachru, and again they're redeemed, they're converted, or they are freed. Yiseiros albanos shaloshana v'yom echad. But if they're older than 3 years old in a day, so at that point also it's assumed that they have lost their basulim, ksubason mone. They get only 100 for the ksuba v'ein lahen tainas basulim, and again there's no claim. The person cannot claim, I thought this was going to be a basula and it was not. That is not the case over here. Again, since they are older than 3 years old, their act of relations is going to be considered an act of relations, and it can be assumed if they're giores, or shvuya and shivcha, so it can be assumed that at one point in time they may have been violated. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yudah Amar Rav. Rav Yudah says in the name of Rav, Katan haba al hagadola. Let's say you have a case of a boy that's a minor who has relations with a girl that's an adult. Asa mukas eitz. He gives her the status of a mukas eitz. Rashi over here says, Asa mukas eitz. Nihi de'ein biyaso bia. Granted that the act of relations is not considered an act of relations, that we've said. Miu lo gara me eitz haniska. But nevertheless, it's not going to be any less than if she would have had an injury from a piece of wood. And therefore, Rashi says, Ulurabanan de pligi amukas eitz ksubasamana. According to the Rabbanan, because we had a machlokas in the Mishnah, what does a mukas eitz receive? Does she receive 200 or 100? So according to the Rabbanan, in this case, of a katan habala gadola, it's going to be like a mukas eitz, and she's only going to get 100. V'chein le'inyan kohen gadol. Also, this would have ramifications for kohen gadol. T'tanan lo yisa es mukas eitz. It's going to be learned in the Mishnah that he's not allowed to marry mukas eitz. Hanami asirule. This woman also, with the katan habala gadola, that gadola is going to be forbidden to the kohen gadol. In any case, that was a statement of Rav. So ki amrisa kami de Shmuel. When Rav Yehuda said this statement of Rav in front of Shmuel, Amar, so he said back, Ein mukas eitz bebasar. It's not true. You don't get the status of mukas eitz if it's not really something like eitz, something like wood. If it's just flesh, like in this case, by the flesh of a katan, so to speak, when he has the relations, that's not going to create the status of a mukas eitz. Rashi over here says, Ein mukas eitz besar adam. You're not going to have mukas eitz with the flesh of man, meaning again with an act of relations with a person. V'i bu'ula lo have mukas eitz nami lesa. If you're not considering her a bu'ula, which again she might be considered a bu'ula had the person been older, but in this case, if you're not considering her bu'ula, you're not going to consider her a mukas eitz as well. So it turns to be a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel whether this case of katan habala gadola is going to be considered a mukas eitz or not. The Gemara continues. There's some people who just learn this sugya by itself. You don't have Rav Yehuda over here quoting them. Rather, it's just taught as follows: katan habala gadola. When it comes to a katan who has relations with a gadola, Rav Amar asam mukas eitz. Rav says it makes her a mukas eitz. Shmuel Amar ein mukas eitz bebasar. And again, the same thing. Shmuel says there's no mukas eitz by basar, by flesh. Rashi says bi'apei nafsha below gavri, with no people quoting. Delo Amar Rav Yehuda mishmei de Rav mishmei de Shmuel. It's not Rav Yehuda quoting Rav and then quoting Shmuel. El enu gufayu iflug, but there was a direct tradition of a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel in this case. And the Gemara continues, Mesev Rav Oshi. Rav Oshi asks the following question. Gadol shabala katana. It said in our Mishnah, you have an adult, a gadol, who has relations with a katana, with a girl that's a katana less than 3 years old. The katan habala gadola, or the case that we're discussing here, of a katan haba al hagadola, mukas eitz, and you have a case of a mukas eitz, ksubasan masayim divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says it's 200. The chachamim amar mukas eitz ksubasan mana. Like we saw in the Mishnah, the chachamim say the mukas eitz, the ksuba is just 100. And so Rashi over here says, "V'katan shavala gadola umukas eitz umidapalginu tana letarti v'lo ifla grabanan ela b'mukas eitz." Now, if you just look at the simple reading of the Mishnah, there's a machlokas tanoim. How much does a mukas eitz get? But there's no machlokas by katan habala gadola. Shamat mina in mukas eitz bebasar. Don't you see clearly from our Mishnah that there's no mukas eitz bebasar? Those are two different categories. The Mishnah does not say that katan habala gadola is identical to a mukas eitz, and therefore that seems to be exactly what Shmuel was actually saying. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Rava, Rava says, Hachi Kamar. Here's how you can understand the Mishnah according to Rav. Gadol haba al hakatana v'lo klum. Number one, if you have an adult male who has relations with a girl who is under 3 years old, that's nothing. The pachos mikan, because if she's so young, if she's less than 3, kenosen etzba ba'ayin dami. That's like putting the finger in the eye. We've mentioned before, the tears just come right back. It doesn't really take away the besulim because they just return, and therefore that's nothing. V'katan haba al hagedola asam mukas. Now the way to understand the Mishnah is that by a katan haba al hagedola, that's the same thing as a mukas. Mukas gufa, and when it comes to mukas, that itself is a plug. So the Rabbi Meir v'Rabbanan, that is a machlokes Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan. So you could understand our Mishnah in light of what Rav says. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama says, Machlokes kishehikirba. The whole machlokes by a mukas, whether she gets 200 or 100, that's only kishehikirba when he understood that this was the case all along. Rashi says, kishehikirba kishekansa, when he married her, v'chazav l'ksuba, and wrote the ksuba for her, hayodea she mukas, he knew that she was a mukas. That's the machlokes in our Mishnah. The Rabbi Meir medami lo lebogeres, because Rabbi Meir understands that to be the same thing as a bogeres. V'Rabbanan medamu lo lebeula, and the Rabbanan understand that that's the same thing as a ba'ula, as though someone already had relations. But let's say he didn't realize this was the situation with her. Everybody agrees she gets nothing in such a situation. Rashi over here says, Medami lola bogeres. Again, it's a machlokas whether she's like a bogeres. The point is that by a bogeres, really once a woman reaches a certain age, that's really not a full besulam over there. The signs of the fact that she's a besula have already started to go away. Now, nevertheless, a bogeres who had never had relations, her ksuba is 200, and so that's why that's exactly what the machlokas is. You have one opinion that says she's considered like a bogeres. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion, and therefore even a mukas is going to get 200. And again, the Rabbanan are going to say 100 is like a bu'ula. But if it's lo hikirba, the Gemara said v'lo klum, it's nothing. The mekachtos, so that's considered a mekachtos. He didn't even realize what he was getting. Ve'afilu mona ein lo. She's not even going to get a mona in that situation. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Meir, amai medami lo lebogeres. But according to Rabbi Meir, why are we comparing a mukas to a bogeres? Nedami lebula. Why don't we say it's the same thing as a bula, like a girl who already had relations? And so the Gemara answers very simply, buula is avid b'maisa b'dei adam. By a buula, something happened to her from someone else, from another man. Halo is avid b'maisa b'dei adam. But over here, by the mukas, nothing happened to her by the actions of another person. V'Rabbanan, and we can ask on the Rabbanan the same question, ad medamu lo lebuula. You're comparing the mukas to a bu'ula, Nadami bogeres, why not compare her to a bogeres? And the Gemara answers simply, bogeres lo esavid b'maisa klal. By the bogeres, nothing happened to her. Ha esavid b'maisa, but over here, there was something that did happen. And the Gemara continues, avalo hikirba, but we said if the person didn't realize she was a mukas, l'divrei hakol v'lo klum. According to everybody, she gets nothing. And the Gemara continues, Meiser Rav Nachman asks a question on this from the following Mishnah. He omeres mukas eitzani. She says, I'm a mukas eitz. V'hu omer lo, kila drusas ishat. And he says, no, you're not a mukas eitz. Really, you had relations with a man, and that's why you don't have your besulim. So the Mishnah says, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer, omrim nem menes. Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, they say that she is the one that's believed, and we believe she's a mukas eitz. Rashi over here says, he omeres mukas eitzani. Mishnah seinu, he again, that's our Mishnah. V'hu omer lo, kila drusas ishat. He says, no, you're drusas ish. Hanose eso isha becheskas besula. The case is, he marries a woman, and it's a chazaka that she's a besula. V'lo matzala besulam. But he doesn't find, after he has relations with her, he doesn't find that she's a besula. He omeres mukas eitzani v'chulu. And again, they're arguing. She says she's a mukas eitz. He says drusas ish. So shma mino isla ksuba oman omasayim. Now, what do you see from this? You see from this that at least the mukas eitz, she must be claiming something. So a mukas eitz must be getting a ksuba either 100 or 200. To e lesla, because if she doesn't get anything, so my nem menes to come Rabbi Gamliel. What's Rabbi Gamliel saying? She's believed. Well, she's obviously believed for something. Must be she's getting some money. Alma mukas eitz shelo hikirba. Now, what do you see from all this? This is a case of a mukas eitz shelo hikirba. He didn't know she was a mukas eitz because clearly they're arguing. She's saying I'm a mukas eitz. He's saying no, you're a drusas ish, and he was assuming all along she was besula. So this is a case of mukas eitz shelo hikirba. Yesh laksuba. Clearly, it's saying that she's entitled to some money. Tiyufta de Rami Bar Chama. So that's a refutation of what Rami Bar Chama said. Tiyamar lo hikirba divrei hakol v'lo klum. He said that if he didn't know ahead of time, that's like a mekachtos, and she doesn't get anything. So this certainly seems to refute Rami Bar Chama Rama's position. Gemara continues, Elo rather, Amar Rava, Rava says this is the way we understand it. Bein hikirba uvein lo hikirba. Whether or not he knew ahead of time, whether he didn't, Rabbi Meir Masayim. Rabbi Meir will always say it's 200, because Rabbi Meir says it doesn't matter. There's no difference in mukas eitz and a girl who is not a mukas eitz. In both cases, they're entitled to 200. But when it comes to the Rabbanon who say that a mukas eitz is less than a regular situation of a basula, so there hikirba mana. So there he'll say if he knew all along, so she gets a mana. Lo hikirba, but if he didn't even realize that, velo klum. So then she's not going to get anything. And Rashi over here explains, according to Rashi, she always gets 200, regardless by a mukas eitz. That Mishnah which says that she's claiming she's a mukas eitz and she gets a ketubah, it means she's getting 200 according to Rabbi Meir. The Rabbanan, they're the ones that make a distinction. You'll have to say, according to the Chachamim, she's only going to get that 100 when he realized all along she was a mukas eitz. But lo hikirba v'lo klum. But the Rabbanan will say, if he didn't realize, then she gets nothing. Rashi just points out, you can't say according to Rabbi Meir that if he knew all along it's 200, if he didn't know it's 100. Because the fact is like this: if you're going to say there's a distinction, you're saying it's a mekach tos, so mishum de lo hikirba less lamidi. She's certainly going to get nothing if it's a mekach tos. V'lav mekach tos, and if it's not a mekach tos, ein chilek bein hikir lo hikir. There's no real difference between whether he knew or whether he did not know. But the Gemara continues, V'hadar bei Rava, that in fact Rava retracted what he said. Rashi over here says it means, V'hadar bei Rava mimai da'amar l'Rabbanan lo hikir ba v'lo klum. Rava had said that according to the Rabbanan we make a distinction, and by lo hikir ba, if he didn't know all along, so then she gets nothing. Ela bein hikir, bein lo hikir yesh lamana l'Rabbanan u'masayim l'Rabbi Meir. Rather, Rava is going to retract and say it doesn't matter. There's never a difference between hikir and lo hikir. According to the Rabbanan, it's always a mon, it's always 100. According to Rabbi Meir, it's always going to be 200. U'masnisin dahasam divrei hakol. Then you could say that Mishnah later where she's claiming she's a mukas eitz, that follows everybody because everybody agrees she's entitled to some ketubah when she's a mukas eitz. And the Gemara continues and proves that Rava retracted the Tanya as we learned in a baraita. Keitzad hotzoas shemra. What exactly is the case of a motzi shemra? That's when the person is claiming that she's not a basula, but he's really lying about it. Rashi over here says hotzoas shemra leonish meo kesef. The halach is he actually gets punished by paying 100 silver, 100 kesef. Im shakar if he lies, v'lisokil im emes haya. And then again, of course, if he's telling the truth, then and she was committing adultery, then there's going to be skila in that case for her. So the Brisa says, what exactly is this case? So bo lebezin, let's say the person comes to bezin, v'yamar ploni lo matzasi levitcha besulim, and the guy says, I didn't find that your daughter was a basula. Yesh edim shezin satachtav. Now, if there are edim that she committed adultery, so yesh l'ksuba mana, she gets 100. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? Yesh edim shezin satachtav baskila. 1 second. If there are edim that she committed adultery, she's going to get skila. That makes no sense. So obviously we're missing something here. So the Gemara explains the Brisa. Here's what it means. Obviously, if there's edim that she committed adultery, she gets skila. Now, zinza meikara. Now, if it turns out that she had znus beforehand, meaning it wasn't after the erison, she had relations earlier, it turned out that she was not really a basula. So in that case, obviously, she's not going to get skila. There was no adultery, but she was not a basula. So there, the halach is yeshla ksuba mana. She's entitled to a ksuba like a buula. She gets a ksuba of 100. And the Gemara continues. So on this brisa, Rav Chia Baravin said in the name of Rav Shesha, Zos Omeres, this brisa proves, Kansa becheskas basula, if a person marries her, on the presumption she's a basula, v'nim says, Ba'ula yesh l'ksuba mana. It turns out she's a ba'ula, she gets 100, because that's exactly what this brisa is saying. And so the Gemara continues, Umesav Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman asked on that idea. Rav Shesha is essentially saying, if a person marries a woman thinking she's a basula, she turns out to be bula, she still gets the ksuva. She still gets 100. So Rav Nachman asks as follows. It says, Hano say eso isha, velo matzola basulim. The case is, the person marries a woman and he finds she doesn't have the basulim. He omeres misherastani na nasti. Now she claims that she was raped after the betrothal. V'nistach vasadeu, and it's like your field got flooded. There's nothing you could do about it. It's nobody's fault. It's too bad. But he says, no. Really what happened was, this all happened before the betrothal. And therefore, really, my purchase was a mistaken purchase. And therefore, therefore, she should be entitled to nothing. I should give her nothing. Why? Because he's saying this was a mekachtos. She should get nothing. And so that's what it says over here. V'yamar luhu Rav Chia Baravin. And so Rav Chia Baravin, he said to them, Efshar Rav Amram v'chol Gedolei Hador Yasvi. Is it possible that Rav Amram and all the Gedolei Hador were sitting? Kiyomer Rav Sheisha's Loshmaita, when Rav Sheisha said over his teaching, V'kasha Lahu v'shani, and then they had the following kasha, and they answered as follows: My mekachtos nami mimasayim. What does it mean mekachtos? So the answer that was given was, it only means that it's a mekachtos, meaning she doesn't get 200. Aval mona isla, but she is entitled to 100. V'yat amrit lesla klal, and you're saying that mekachtos means she gets nothing at all. And the Gemara then continues, V'yamar Rava, and then Rava said on that, Man de kamosif shaper kamosif. No, you're wrong. When you're the one asking the question, in other words, they were asking the question over here from this case of Hanose Isha v'lo matzala besulam, and they're making an assumption that when he's saying it's mekachtos, it's v'les laklal, that she's getting nothing. That's why it's a question on Rav Sheshes, because Rav Sheshes said she gets 100. And so the Gemara says that they had answered that no, mekachtos means exactly what Rav Sheshes said. It means she gets 100. And Rava said, no, you're wrong. V'yamar Rava said, man de kamosif shaper kamosif. No, the original question on Rav Sheshes was actually a very good question, because mekachtos legamri mashma, because the word mekachtos sounds like legamri. If you're going to say something is a mekachtos, it means that you get nothing at all. And so the Gemara says, V'yela kashach, but if that's the case, we still have a question from this particular brisa, and the Gemara here is referring to the original brisa about Motzi Shemra. It says by Motzi Shemra, she gets a ksuba of money. Right? If the case over there is that if there are edim, that it says if there are edim that it was zinsa mei kara, so she gets ksuba money. How do you explain that? It's a mekachtos, it should be nothing. And so the Gemara says, no, taretz ve'imhachi, you can understand that original brisa Motzi Shemra as follows. Em yesh edim shezinsa tachtav, if there are edim that she committed adultery while they were married, beskila, like we said, she gets skila. Zinsa mei kara velo klum. But however, if this nus happened originally beforehand, that's a mekachtos, and you should understand that brisa to mean that she gets nothing. However, the brisa then ends off and says, nimtzas mukas eitz, if it turns out that the reason she had no besulim is because she's a mukas eitz, not because of zinsa mei kara, yesh la ksuba mana. That's the situation where she gets a ksuba of a mana. But in any case, what comes out over here? In any case, it comes out that nimtzas mukas eitz, it was lo hikirba, he did not realize ahead of time. And in the case of mukas eitz, so it comes out that she gets a mana. V'harava hu damar l'rabbanan lo hikirba v'lo klum. But didn't Rava say that according to the rabbanan who say it's a mana, so if it was lo hikirba, it gets nothing. But here we're amending this whole brisa to say mukas eitz by lo hikirba yesh la ksuba mana. Elashma mina, rather you see from that hadar bein Rava me'ahi. Rava in fact did retract, and Rava said there's no distinction between hikirba and lo hikirba, whether you're in the shita of Rabbi Meir, whether you're in the shita of the rabbanan. And Rashi over here explains ki amar Rav Sheshes la shemaita, again Rav Chia bar Avin, he was the one that originally quoted Rav Sheshes, and he had said that according to Rav Sheshes, if a man marries a woman thinking she is a basula, and then it turns out she is a bu'ula, she's entitled to 100. And so then they asked the question again from this nistachva sadeu mishnah that seemed to say that a mekachtos you get nothing. And so that's why Rav Chia bar Avin again he was saying, is it possible Rav Sheshes said over his teaching, L'ai zoso meres de la'el de yesh la ksuba mana? Again, Rav Sheshes is the one that said that she gets a mana. V'kashalu hados vinan, and then they had this question, and then they answered that mekachtos doesn't mean to say that she loses out completely. It means a mana, and you're saying she loses out completely. V'amar Rava, and then Rava said to the back, no, mekachtos is mashma, she loses out completely. And so then the Gemara said, V'yala kasha hach, but then we have a question again from that original, the brisa about Motzi Shemra. V'yakshinan l'Rava la kasha hach de la'el de katani zinsa mei kara yesh la ksuba mana. If you're saying mekachtos means you lose out totally, so what did that mean earlier when it says that you're going to get a ksuba of a mana? And so then the Gemara says, no, taritz lahi de la'el, we can answer that earlier brisa, to keitzad hotzoas shemra, when it talked about Motzi Shemra, teirutza de taratz de la lo tisratza hachi elohachi im yeshedem v'chulu. Really, you should explain that brisa as follows, and it means to say, you read it as follows. Nimtzis lo hikir ba mashma v'kometaritz Rava. Again, it's a case of nimtzitz, it's lo hikir ba, he didn't know that she wasn't a basula. And Rav is explaining as follows, yesh la ksuba mana, that she gets a ksuba of a mana. Alma hadr be ma'hi de la'el, you see already from that, by mukas eitz, he's saying she gets 100. That's a retraction from before. Dayu amar l'rabbanan v'lo klum, because he had said that if it's a case of lo hikirba by mukas eitz according to the rabbanan, it's nothing. Rabbi Meir nami lo sak, when you can't say this brayse is Rabbi Meir, da Rabbi Meir masayim kamer, because like we said, Rabbi Meir says really she's entitled to 200. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Kansa Rishon L'Shum Nisuin. Let's say you have a situation where the first person marries her for the purpose of marriage. V'yesh lo Eidim Shelo Nistra, and there are witnesses that they never went into seclusion. Inami Nistra V'lo Sho'asa Kadebia, or maybe they did go into seclusion, but it wasn't enough time for relations. So Ein Hasheni Yachol Liton Tainas Basulam. Still, the second person that marries her cannot claim a claim that he thought she was a Basula and she wasn't. Sharei Kansa Rishon, because the fact of the matter is, the first person did in fact marry her. Rashi over here says, V'yesh leidim shelo nister or yibus ashmin, and this is really just a chiddush. Te'afilu achi, even though there were witnesses that there was no seclusion, ein hasheni yachol liton tainas besulim lafsidik subasa, still, he can't say that, I thought she was a basula, she's not, and she shouldn't get a ksuba, v'leima mekachto, so he can't claim that. Sharei konsa rishon, Rashi continues, the reason is because the first person in fact did marry her. V'yolav ladash, and again, he should have understood or realized that she had relations, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Bei's Amud Aleph.